not. And we've decided not to do it this year based on that. And we may revisit this again next year. Part of it is if we were growing an acre of carrots, it would look a lot better. A lot of this stuff is dependent on scale, and you buy a piece of equipment, and that cost doesn't go up for seeding an acre versus 10, 50-foot beds. Next slide, please. So here is the detailed carrot. And this is kind of a new framework that I'm trying to transfer some of our crops into. It's got a little more detail in the actual inputs of managing and planting a crop, but there's not a whole lot of difference in that. The biggest differences come down to the marketing costs, which you see on the second on the right hand side of the page, and then also down below that is the overhead costs, and these are what Barbara and Ken were talking about as far as the overhead costs of being the farm costs that are fixed and are there whether you produce one thing, 0 things, or 100. We have decided we put a value on that, inventoried the business and its assets. We put a value on that, and then the way that we have accomplished putting that onto different enterprises is by dividing that total overhead by however many beds we're producing. So we have 150 beds. We divide that out to that. So every bed gets allocated $96 of that overhead. And I've seen a few different approaches to this. Some people will allocate more to, say, a greenhouse because you're expecting more out of it, more yield, more productivity, and therefore more gross income. I just guess would just prefer to make it fair and put it on everything, and keep it the same so that I can get a clear picture of each thing and compare them without kind of taking that into consideration. And then as far as the marketing costs, this aspect wasn't in all of the previous enterprise budgets that we did, and we're lucky enough that most of everything that we produce we sell here in Moscow, sometimes to Pullman, but so we have very, very low marketing, transportation costs, and so each crop gets allocated a little bit differently there, and generally, like for that first labor sales calls for the season, something like carrots, we have a lot more than others because we're storing them in root cellars and making calls all winter to sell carrots. But a lot of other things that will be zero. And then as far as the farmers market expenses, we come up with the fee for the farmers market, all of the gear that we have to set up at market, and then a wage for us to be at market for 5 hours selling produce. We then allocate that in a similar way to the overhead of however many markets are per year. We divide it by that, and then divide it by how many crops are being produced. So 44 this year, and we kind of in a way depreciate it that way, and spread it over all the different crops. So through that, then everything gets added up. Total costs, crop overhead total, $275.98, and the expenses, because we're adding those overhead and marketing costs, they went up from our previous budgets, but it includes all the expenses, gives us a clear picture. It doesn't make each bed look quite as good, but it's covering all the expenses. So then through that, we type in where we're selling it, what our price per unit is, and we come up with the $625 total sales, which gets the total cost subtracted from that, and that then gives us the net profit of $349.03. And then we've just got some simple equations to extrapolate that out to an acre, and then show us what our actual cost per unit is, and what we're adding to that to come up with our price. So they really help us a lot in seeing what it is, and we take a little bit different approach to the pricing. For one, we're fortunate to live in a place where people value what we're doing a lot, and are willing to pay maybe a bit more than the grocery store sometimes not. But we take the approach of knowing what it takes to produce 1 unit, 1 pound, whatever it is you're looking at, and then figuring out our price off of that. So that about does it. I'll kind of go over again. I meant to put a slide on just kind of bullet pointing the decisions that all these budgets help us with. But the biggest thing is that we're putting this worth on whatever unit. For us, a 50-foot bed, and that then in turn helps us determine what things to grow. Should we completely cut out carrots, say, or should we be growing more of them? And if we're going to decide to keep something, we can look at the breakdown of inputs and decide, is there a way that we can buy something in bulk and reduce our expenses? Is there somewhere where we're being inefficient in time, and can we make that better so that we're being as efficient as we can and save money that way? It does give us that break-even cost per unit, which really is a key factor in how we do our pricing. So the last thing that I was going to talk about, and I wish I had gotten the spreadsheet up for it, but it was our enterprise budget for our laying hens, and it's quite a bit more complex than this, partly because there's a lot more equations, there's a lot more variables with minerals and feed, and then different costs throughout the year. So when we get chicks to start, there's only a 3-month period, 4-month period where we're maintaining them, and that kind of makes the whole thing more complex. And so I had some problems with my equations, so I didn't put it up. But when I was working on that the last few days, the numbers were looking less and less good, and so we've started to talk, about our decision of keeping that going, doing away with it. Does it become a loss leader, or maybe just less of a leader, if that's a term? And there are a lot of other decisions that are very hard to put on paper and put a number on. A lot of other benefits to having something like chickens, or any of this stuff that you need to kind of work through once you have the numbers, and will kind of influence that decision. So what we've kind of determined at this point, we'll keep them on. More than likely, it's a scale issue, and so maybe having more birds helps, and that's not always the case. But for something like chickens, is kind of the outlook on it. So I think that is all that I had. The last slide is just a picture of our market, and I thank everybody. I hope I didn't go too long, and are there any questions?
That was a great presentation, Greg. Thank you very much. We only had a couple questions. One was looking at your first two enterprise budgets. At the bottom, where you were looking at the amount of work, we had a question about why that wasn't equated necessarily to the hours, the rating that you gave.
Yeah, it's not equated directly in the spreadsheet. We just kind of we kind of view that scale more as, do we enjoy the work? Is it our gut feeling that it's just a lot of work to produce this one thing? And we'll kind of, weigh that lightly against all the actual hours that are itemized above. And so it's just a simple gauge for us to kind of look at it.
Okay, great. Thank you. The other question was a management-oriented question, and it is, what is flaming? That was in your carrot slide.
Yeah. Flaming is something that we've started to do. It's a weeding management technique. And for something like carrots that germinate slowly, grow very slowly once they're up for the first half of their life, cultivation and managing weeds is a very big expense and very time consuming. That's the same reason that we were looking at getting a new seeder. So for flaming, it's actual propane torch, and we will sometimes create what we call stale seed beds. We'll prepare the bed, water it, let weeds germinate, and then flame the weeds when they're at a very small stage, and then plant into it. Sometimes with carrots, then we will plant it, and then if we have our timing just precise, we will flame the germinated weeds a day before the carrots actually come out of the soil, and that will effectively kind of reduce that first weeding, the first major flush of weeds that we have to deal with in a carrot bed. And it all comes down to timing, and it's a really great tool that we have, when we're not talking about using any kind of herbicides.